Barron's going the same direction, knifing it super deep. Mamiya comes out.
It's a great day. Well, we got another competition that's happening as well that we're kicking off for finals day. Scoring starts at the quarterfinals. Let's take a look at our Vissla CT Shaper rankings. Ooh, Channel Islands in that first place position with Barron helping the cause with 10,000 points. Look at top 5, Jesse, Chris Borst, and he only has one rider on tour.
Yeah, the lone wolf, and taking out 10,000 points, almost as much as anyone else right there. So that's huge from him to actually be able to make the top 5 only with one athlete, and it's a talented athlete.
Our defending champ, Matt Biolis, lost surfboards. They got some ground to make up, but good news is we got 8 more events on the championship tour for all of that to change.
All right, we are coming back from break. This is the Lineup Podcast. I'm Dave Prodan here with Mitchell Salazar, and it is now time for the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings update.
Shaper ranking!
This is our second year running the Shaper Rankings, or as Britt Merrick calls it, the contest within the contest, as more than one person has come up and said it's the Shaping World title. Last year, we saw Matt Biolis and Lost Surfboards win CT Shaper of the Year for 2023. They are awarded at the Lexus WSL Awards at the Turtle Bay just before this year's CT season started. And there was a ton of movement last offseason as the world's best board builders got their programs built up for the start of the 2024 CT season. Just a reminder to our listeners, the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings ranks shapers based on points given to their team riders who finish in the quarterfinals or better. The ranking is a combined men's and women's ranking. The higher the surfer places, the more points that shaper receives. And we are going to be tracking the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings from CT1, which just concluded at Pipeline, through CT9, which will be in Fiji, and crown the 2024 CT Shaper of the Year before the WSL Finals in September. So, Mitch, what were your observations from the booth on the equipment that the world's best surfers were riding, and what do you think of the current top 5 on the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings after Pipe?
Well, pretty surprising that, Mayhem dropped down so much, especially given the success that he had at the beginning of the year in 2023. Big props to Channel Islands. I think they owe us a couple of boards now, Dave, because we really blew them up over at World Juniors. I mean, they had multiple people on finals day over there, and then here, at the Lexus Pipe Pro, obviously getting the win with Barron Mamiya, a new acquisition, by the way, which to me is a great signing. Imaikalani deVault makes the quarters too. Betty Lou Sakura Johnson, she was riding them for the majority of the event up until finals day, so Slater Designs, they get those points right there. But overall, I felt like DHD had a solid event too. Given that Connor O'Leary decided to go with Tokoro's for the last day and he made it into the semis, I thought that was huge for Wade Tokoro, but it wasn't as strong for Darren Hanley, and he was pumped. I mean, if you saw him on the broadcast, the guy is legit really, really pumped for this year. He wanted to be able to wear yellow at the end of the season last year, but I think the acquisition of, getting both Ethan Ewing, Jacob Wilcox on the team full-time too, and he even mentioned on the broadcast that Jacob Wilcox was actually working at his factory a good amount of time in between Challenger Series event just to be able to see what went on behind the scenes. I think that's huge for them. They got 5 men, 2 women on the team that really have good results here at Pipe. I feel like Sunset Beach is going to be a good event for them. And I feel like Mayhem, they have a lot to prove going into Sunset because with a good amount of surfers, especially with Crosby, Cole, and Cade being good surfers at Sunset Beach, I would expect them to do well. But, Chris Borst, once again, doing things with Caitlin Simmers. I mean, he moves up into 5 with just 1 surfer on the CT, Dave.
One's all it takes. I want to get into that, but I thought you said something interesting too, and you've spoken about this from your own competitive lens in the past as well. But, you talked about Connor O'Leary was on Tokoro's on that final day en route to his semifinal finish. He is a DHD team rider. Those could have been points going to Darren Hanley, but it seemed to be on the ground, those traveling shapers like your Britt Merricks or your Matt Biolises or your Darren Hanleys, they were all just so stoked about not only the Vissla CT Shaper rankings, but just to see the world's best on their boards. But it didn't seem like there was any insecurity or animosity if their team riders decided to use a Takoro or use an Arakawa or use a Pang because they're in Hawaii. You know, Gabriel Medina, who's a Kabianca Surfboards team rider, he was on Takoros. You know, Jack Robinson, who's a Sharpeye team rider, he was on Arakawas. We talked about Connor being a DHD team rider riding Takoros. Leonardo Fioravanti had a bunch of different shapers. Betty Lou had a bunch of different shapers. So it was cool to see kind of the communal vibe about, even though maybe they weren't getting these points in the rankings, they still were appreciative that these long-standing Hawaiian shapers who have built boards for the best surfers every time they come to Hawaii for decades at this point were getting their flowers as well. But can you talk to us a little bit about that, Mitch? Because you obviously have traveled to Hawaii, you've competed in Hawaii. What is it about the Hawaiian shapers that gives the surfers such confidence in those kinds of waves?
Well, first things first, as a surfer and as a competitor, I'm riding what feels good to me. So in the end, I feel like that's what Betty Lou had in mind when she was in finals day. She was riding something that just felt comfortable and natural to her. On the side of the Hawaiian shapers, Glenn Pang said it best during his little intro with the Vissla CT Shaper rankings on the broadcast. We know these waves better, we know the locations better, and we want to be able to give these traveling surfers the boards that a lot of these local surfers would be riding in these given conditions. So overall, you have Wade Takora, who's an incredible surfer, John Pizell, amazing surfer, Glenn Pang also could easily be, you know, in the 50, 60 plus range of great competitors worldwide. And Eric Arakawa, Jack Robinson mentioned that he's, you know, basically his uncle. Yeah. So having a relationship like that that's super intimate for somebody that makes and designs boards at, you know, the world's most highest quality level possible, I think is super important for somebody who's looking to make it back into the top 5 and can compete for a world championship. I think they deserve a lot of praise and credit, but more importantly, it goes to show you that you're always going to go with a board that is very accurate to the location. We saw with Mick a lot of times when he used to come to Lower Trestles too, he used to order Mayhems, and Darren Hanley had nothing to say about it. He was like, dude, I'm going to support you fully in your decision, because in the end, if you're winning the world championship and my name's attached to your name, that's perfectly fine with me. So I think in the end, it's just going to come down to those people that are willing to let go of their ego and allow their surfers to surf certain boards at certain locations. And then in the end, Marcio said it on the broadcast in his little piece, I have a couple world championships, I have multiple event wins, so whether or not I win the Vissla CT Shaper rankings is kind of irrelevant to me. I feel in the end, most of these guys are just too competitive to let that go. But as a surfer, you got to go with what feels best for you, Dave.
Yeah, it's a good point. I'm glad you brought up Marcio and Sharpeye. I have a feeling he'd like to be the CT Shaper of the year, and he, I mean, he could very well do it this year. We mentioned it in the prior segment, but it bears repeating. Like, Sharpeye have built such an impressive program over the last few years, and they were so dominant on the men's championship tour in 2023. They had bad luck on the women's side last year. They had Johanne Defay, who went out with an injury early on, and uncharacteristic performances from Tatiana Weston-Webb last year. She was performing certainly under her average in 2023. But they had the complete inversion at Pipe, right? They had no men's team riders who made it to the quarterfinals or better, but they had 3 women's team riders put points on the board for them. Johanne Defay, who's back from injury and looks as solid as ever. Luana Silva, who's young but getting her second crack at the CT as a replacement surfer. And then Tatiana Weston-Webb feels like she's found a return to form. Yep. Your opinion on Sharpeye moving forward, because I think that it will be more of an anomaly that their men's team doesn't put up any results in the Shaper rankings. And if their women's team's able to flesh that out, they could be very, very dangerous in a very short amount of time.
True. And I mean, that's what we talked about all last year, Dave. It's that their women's team didn't perform the way they needed to, and that's why Mayhem was so successful. Carissa, Caroline, obviously, their top 2 riders on the women's side for loss, but look at the rankings on the women's side just after Pipe. They win. Sharpeye wins that event. Yeah. So 14,235 on the season. Event finish, number 1 with 10,000 points. And I think most importantly, the confidence that it's going to give a lot of these young women moving forward too, because Luana Silva, she's a local at Sunset Beach. She surfs great there. I mean, if you look at her free surfing clips, she's just outstanding. I feel like Tati could easily have a bounce back event, especially on the backhand right there. And the one wild card is Johanne Defay, because given that she's had a lot of time off to be able to recover fully from injury and has something to prove too, because she was a world title contender for 2 years in a row, I feel like this should be a good event for her too. But I also want to mention the additions of Samuel and Miguel Pupo to the JS team. Finally, Jason Stevenson opens up a major market in Brazil. I don't know what took him so long, Dave, but that's a market that he hadn't touched. And given that he was so successful in the late 2000s, early to mid 2010s, he now has multiple riders on the CT. He has, Miguel and Sam, but most importantly, Ryan Callanan, who's been his stable guy on the Championship Tour for many years. So big props to them. They still need a bigger women's crew, but overall, that's a big change.
Yeah, and Frederico Moraes is back for JS as well. Yep. So it's interesting to see him get in the mix. No results for them at Pipe, but early days in the season. I think it's totally worth it for us to round off the Vissla CT Shaper ranking segment by talking about the current front runners. You talked about them already, but it should be emphasized, like a really impressive rebuild in the last couple of years from Channel Islands. It's a brand that arguably still has the most world titles on its surfboards over the last several decades, but it's also one that lead shaper Britt Merrick and team manager Brent Powers have been pretty candid about. They've been rebuilding their roster in the last few years after a dominant few decades. And they had a great opening event. You mentioned it. The off-season acquisition of Barron Mamiya, he delivers a win at Pipe. You've got returning from the Challenger Series surfer Imaikalani deVault, nabs a quarterfinals result, and that delivered them the best outing in the opening event for the Vissla CT Shaper rankings. It could have been even stronger. You mentioned it before. Betty Lusakura Johnson was riding CIs in the opening days of the event, moved up to her step up with Slater Designs for the final day, so they get those points. But they could be a real danger team to watch as well. And I'm sure, like all these programs, they're looking at not only shoring up the talent they currently have on the team and securing them, making sure they've got the right equipment for the right waves, but also looking at some of these other surfers that are out there, because there is some fluidity on tour on both the men's and women's side in terms of what the world's best surfers are riding.
Oh, and just another thing to add for JS, Ramsey Bukiam's also on that team.
Oh, great point. Great point.
Yeah. So they have a couple people that they added on. But you know what's so surprising about Channel Islands, Dave? I mean, they have, out of all the shapers worldwide and all of the brands, they probably went downhill the most during a span of 3 or 4 years. They were kind of irrelevant, almost like Brock Purdy, who made the Super Bowl for the San Francisco 49ers. It felt like that. And all of a sudden, they're back on the scene. They're always being in the conversation of the best shaper and the best boards. And I feel like they probably have the most overall board around, this Happy Every Day, which I feel is a perfect board for somebody that's just looking to have fun in any kind of conditions. But they don't have a massive team. And I kind of just noticed that Lakey Peterson, she loses out early, no points on the women's side. And you look at the rest of the crew, you're just like, wow, like overall, it comes down to them just doing well in finals there. So as long as they're making it to the semis or the finals, they're going to have a good shot at it. But it's not like they have a massive team. Still a big amount of props to Sharpeye, which I feel are going to have a great year. But you can't count out those people that have 4 or 5 people overall. And it comes down to doing well on the women's side just because there's a smaller draw. So if you're able to get those people in quarters or better, you're going to have a good chance of being world number 1 at the end of the season.
That's a great point. Well, we are going to take one more quick break to get a word in from our sponsors, and we will finish up the podcast when we come back. We'll be right back.